Hello Scotland fans, and welcome back to our series exploring and touring around Scotland, some of the best historic sites that we've got to offer. And we're heading now to the west coast for the first time and exploring what has to be one of the most photogenic and dramatic castles that we've got, Dunure.
I mean, I've always said one of the reasons I came to Scotland in the first place was for castles like this. You know, you don't tend to find me at, big fancy palaces with lots of gold-framed portraits and silverware on the table. You'll find me at a crumbling ruin next to the sea with the waves lashing it and crows flying overhead, and that is Dunure in a nutshell.
Yeah. We want some drama, some sieges, some embargoes, all of that kind of thing. Blood and gore.
Ridiculous levels of hostility. It's all here.
Family warfare and the rest.
And believe it or not, it's quite romantic as well.
Aye, well, let's see what we can do about that, shall we? So let's dive right into the origins of Dunure Castle then. Where do we start?
Yeah, with places like Dunure, there's always sort of caveats, possibly there was an Iron Age fortification there beforehand, but the first stone castle really comes into play in the mid-1200s, and that is compliments of the Kennedy family.
Ah, yes.
That Kennedy family.
With the Irish connection as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Lands in Scotland as well as Ireland. And that's one of the great things that coastal castles sort of help us appreciate, is that you have to think of, in historical terms, transport in completely the opposite way that we think of it now. We think of going over to Ireland as like it's quite a trek, isn't it?
Yes,
you got to fly over or get however many hours the ferry takes. But for most of history, waterways were highways, they weren't barriers. And so for a family like the Kennedys, who had lands in Ireland as well as Scotland, it was the easiest thing in the world to just pop from one side of the sea to the other, because you're right along the Clyde. And I feel like, I chose Edinburgh as my home, Neil, so I know your dignity would not stand an Edinburgh man to talk about the Clyde. So what does the Clyde mean to you as a Glasgow boy?
Yeah, the Clyde and Glasgow have grown up together. They are very much partners in crime. And unfortunately it was crime, of course, because of the trade route, the triangular trade route between Africa, North America and Glasgow, in terms of slaves being part of that journey, the slave trade. So there's a dark side to what the Clyde has brought, but Glasgow's wealth all stems from its connection with the Clyde, its empire, its status as the second city of the empire, all owed very much to the Clyde. So that waterway, the Firth of Clyde, off the coast, where Dunure is, and passing that way, would have been rife with cogs, trade cogs, and all sorts of pirate ships as well, doing illicit things. Yeah. So that there is very much a water connection to Glasgow.
Definitely. Vikings as well. This would have been a concern for the Kennedys, actually. They were in sort of the later end of the Viking Age, which in Scotland, roughly lasted from sort of the sacking of Iona in 795 right through until the Battle of Largs, really, in 1266. So we're right at the tail end here.
Which is just up the coast.
Exactly, yeah. So, the Kennedys at Dunure Castle would have looked at King Haakon IV's Norwegian fleet sailing up the Clyde to go to the Battle of Largs, and probably would have barred the gates pretty firmly. That's what I'd be doing.
Take the cyanide pills.
The other medieval equivalent thereof.
Yes.
So, and it was, very much, a fortress. Yes, it was an aristocratic residence. But being on the sea, as much as it brought opportunities for wealth creation, sort of moral or immoral, it also meant a lot of opportunities to get yourself in trouble as well. So they were certainly sort of guarding against that. And so the castle changed quite a bit over the centuries. Just sort of expanded, got more of sort of a courtyard complex to it, became a bit more domesticated, I suppose you would say, by the 16th century, and that's where we get the one, the only Mary Queen of Scots paying it a visit as well.
Token gesture. She must visit every castle in Scotland.
Exactly. I think it
puts us to shame, incidentally.
She's the original castle hunter.
Oh, yes.
There's no question about that. I swear, it is tougher to find a castle in Scotland that Mary Queen of Scots didn't visit than one that she did. So there is a little token plaque at Dunure saying, Mary Queen of Scots was here. So it's very much in that club. And she visited 1563, at a time when she was doing kind of a grand tour around a lot of the castles of her realm, trying to smooth over relations with some of her lairds to varying degrees of success.
Yes, I can imagine. And the Kennedys then, sticking with them for a minute, they also have Culzean Castle, which is a good bit more modern, very palatial, completely different state of affairs.
Totally.
Dunure is rugged and dramatic, falling apart, crumbling ruin. Culzean is opulence personified.
Oh, absolutely. It's one of the most architecturally impressive structures in Scotland, I would say. It's just belonging to a completely different era. But it goes to show you that, the Kennedys and other noble families in Scotland would have several seats of power. But Culzean is also right on the coast, and actually on a clear day, and it's Scotland we're talking about here, so admittedly, not very frequently.
One day in June.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. Summer, as we call it, right? Yeah. You can actually see right over to the coast of Northern Ireland. It's pretty remarkable. It makes the world feel a bit smaller, actually.
It does, It's the power of the coast. That's a nice thought.
Yeah. And
back to Dunure, though, because we're easily distracted by Culzean, which we'll probably have to do a separate piece on.
Yeah.
But sticking with Dunure, there's that one story. The Macdonalds and the Campbells coming together in seemingly neutral territory. And it all went wrong.
That old chestnut. Yeah, the Macdonalds and the Campbells, those famously amicable Scottish families. Probably, if you know one thing about sort of clan rivalries in Scotland, it's probably the Macdonalds and the Campbells, isn't it? This came to a head, most infamously with the massacre of Glencoe, which was basically a slaughter of several dozen Macdonald men, women and children in Glencoe by the king's men. So the order did come from the king, but they were led by a Campbell, so the Campbells tend to get a lot of the flack.
And there was a closeness between the Campbells and the monarchy in London, pretty much. There was always that kind of, there are men in Scotland kind of thing, a slight feel of that.
Yeah, well, that's how the Campbells really sort of came to power. They basically sided with the crown whenever it was opportunistic, at the expense of a lot of the other clans in the Highlands. And the Macdonalds were on the opposite end of that spectrum. And by the time of the massacre of Glencoe, the scene had completely changed, and they were kind of regarded as sort of Highland troublemakers. But in the 15th century, when this meeting occurred, 1429 at Dunure Castle.
Emissaries from both families.
Exactly, yeah. So it was James Campbell, representing James I, King of Scots, meeting up with John More Macdonald. And More in Gaelic is big, so like Big John Macdonald, basically. And the Macdonalds at that point, in the mid-15th century, were still the Lords of the Isles, which, in terms of titles,
we've got these islands.
Absolutely, yeah.
And this is on the coast, so you would think, probably if anything, it's safer territory for the Macdonalds.
You think so, yeah. It's just, a short galley ride away from their sort of epicenter. But anytime you get a Campbell or Macdonald together, it's not going to end well, and that's exactly what happened. We don't know exactly how it went down, but one thing led to another, and Macdonald was killed. Don't know if it was by Campbell's own hand. I wouldn't be surprised if it was. And James I, the king at the time, tried to put a lid on this, because he knew that, the Macdonalds, we're not just talking about a small clan here, we're talking about the Lords of the Isles. These guys controlled over a third of what we think of as Scotland now. Pretty much the entire western seaboard, all of the Hebrides, Skye, that whole area was controlled by the Macdonalds.
Civil War.
Absolutely. Yeah. So James actually executed Campbell, trying to get ahead of the fury of the Macdonalds.
To appease the situation.
Exactly. Didn't work. The Macdonalds still rose up, went on to burn Inverness to the ground, as you do,
Protest.
Exactly, yeah. So that was certainly one of the more consequential meetings at Dunure in terms of just the sheer amount of bloodshed that led on from it. But that is far from, the only scandalous story.
Yeah, well, scandal, let's have it.
Oh my god, I mean, I couldn't believe this when I was reading into it. There's so many twists and turns for this one. I'm going to have to refer to my notes here because this just gets absolutely bonkers, guys. So there was a 16th century laird controlling Dunure Castle, Gilbert Kennedy, okay? He was the 4th Earl of Cassilis, and Cassilis was the area in the southwest of Scotland which still sort of comprises, Culane and Mabel and that whole area. And in that period, by the mid to late 16th century, the Protestant Reformation had occurred, it was largely underway, and that led to a massive land grab. A lot of abbeys, cathedrals, and the like, their lands were sort of up for grabs because they were taken away from the church during the Reformation. And so you had a lot of lairds, like Gilbert Kennedy, wanting to get his hands on some of this sweet new real estate that was available. So he actually made an attempt to gain some of the lands of Glenluce Abbey, which is in Dumfries and Galloway. Wasn't initially successful. So he resorted to good old bribery, got a monk from the abbey, paid him off to forge a signature on a land grant so that he would get the abbey. Like, you had to think, I don't think he was terribly concerned about getting into heaven at that point, was he?
I think not, yeah, and the monk's actions probably weren't the most honourable either.
No. So calling everyone's honour into question here, as you do. But that actually was far from the worst of what he did, because he did get access to the lands of Glenluce Abbey, but just to make sure he covered his tracks sufficiently, he had the monk assassinated. And then,
no trail.
And then he had the assassin put in prison.
No connection to
No, I'm surprised he didn't then have someone start a fire in the prison and then, send the arsonist off to the Americas or something. He was just wrapping up every conceivable loose end. So he seems to have gotten away with that, old Gilbert. And then he gets hungrier for more, right? Because, the more power you get, the more you tend to want, right?
Bloodlust as well. It's murder that nobody's calling him on, it would appear.
Well, he's gotten away with it, so why not try again, right? So he did the same with Crossraguel Abbey, which is near Mabel.
Beautiful.
Absolutely stunning. I love that spot. It's got sort of a tower house in its own right there, actually. If you go to the Abbey, you can sort of check off a castle on your list as well. So Abbey and a castle in one. You can ask for more. And the people at the Abbey knew what he had done with Glenluce Abbey, so they got a guy named Alan Stewart to basically try to protect them. And Alan Stewart spent 5 years fending off Gilbert Kennedy's attempts to try to gain these lands. And Kennedy captured Alan Stewart. Alan Stewart later wrote to the Privy Council of Scotland complaining about this because Gilbert caught him, brought him back to Dunure Castle, and roasted him on a spit over an open flame until he signed a tract of land away to him. And apparently it took 2 turns of the spit to do that.
Right. Just a little bit charmed.
Exactly, yeah. Just enough to start smell yourself cooking, and then that did it, basically. He survived, but was none too thrilled afterwards. And so there was sort of a mitigation period. Gilbert ended up paying Alan Stewart a lifetime pension, which is the least you can do after setting a dude on fire, I think. And then Gilbert got to, again, keep most of the lands. So if there's a lesson here for you budding Scottish aristocrats out there, it's basically just be as devious as you possibly can and as blatant and flagrant in covering up your tracks, and you're probably going to get away with it.
No enough catchy here. Yeah.
Good. So, I mean, we make so much of the Campbell and Macdonald rivalry. I think that puts it to shame, quite frankly.
Actually, and murder's just nothing.
No.
Small potatoes.
Now, after that, there was actually a siege of Dunure Castle, because everyone was ticked off about it at this point, right? There was then a counter-siege. Historians actually kind of lose track of what's going on. We're kind of like, okay, so it got damaged a lot. We don't know by who and exactly when, but everyone was after the people inside Dunure Castle at this point. And that's largely what turned it into the ruin that we see today.
So what kind of time frame are we talking here?
Yeah, so we're looking at very late 1500s and certainly certainly by the early 1700s, they probably patched it up a little bit, but by the early 1700s at latest, Dunure was a crumbling ruin, effectively.
That's what we see today.
Yeah, more or less. Now, it would have been a lot worse. There would have been significantly less to see today if it wasn't shored up in the 1800s, because what happened in the 1700s is what happened to so many other castles across Scotland, a little bit of medieval recycling, basically. If you are, living in one of the nearby villages and there's this sweet abandoned castle nearby and you want to build yourself a new path or a new shed, or, local church needs some repairs, there's a whole quarry right there, fashioned, ashlar blocks, that master masons would have worked on. I mean, take that, it's up for grabs, right? So it basically became a quarry for all the locals for several decades.
So if you were to go backwards then, you could rebuild the castle just by pulling all of these stones back out of local theft.
Yeah.
And constructing it as it was.
That's what they say, is you could probably reconstruct most ruined castles in Scotland if you just checked in with some of the local churches and farmers who had built sort of sheds throughout the years and been like, I think that actually belongs back there, thank you very much. Right. Yeah. And so we get to this period, in the 1800s, where it's sort of lauded as a romantic ruin,
of course.
Actually.
And we're good at that. We do have that evocative, mysterious, sombre type ruin that, along with the Scottish moors, the kind of thing, that kind of misty moor thing. We excel in that, I think. And for me this is definitely that kind of castle. Yeah,
well, Dunure in particular, I mean, it is, the definition of a romantic spot. I actually, my partner and I went there for an anniversary a couple of years ago. Before I knew about any of this, we looked at that and went, oh, that looks nice and romantic.
And there's a kind of beach there as well, kind of stone beach, but it's a nice place for you on.
Yeah, well, I'm from Nova Scotia, so I like a good stone beach. It can't be all white sand. I mean, that's softy stuff, right? You need a good, hard stone beach, really.
West of Scotland.
And funny enough, actually, that area sort of, around Ayrshire, it actually reminds me a lot of Nova Scotia, where I'm originally from, which is kind of fitting because, many of the Scots who were either going on to ships voluntarily or more often than not involuntarily as a result of the Highland clearances, would have sailed down the Clyde and they would have passed by Dunure Castle, and that was one of the last areas of Scotland that they would have seen before going off to Nova Scotia, South Africa, the Caribbean, New Zealand, Australia, all these places where these Scots diaspora communities nowadays. And the geography of the area actually, not too rugged, but not too placid either. Very much reminds me of areas of Nova Scotia, so you can see why I got the name.
That's a nice thought, actually, that you would leave, and these people would have been devastated, heartbroken, and terrified at the prospect of having to get on a boat and go across the ocean, taking weeks and months to get there. It's a nice thought that perhaps their arrival at the first sight wouldn't have been quite so different to what they'd left behind.
Exactly.
With some small comfort.
Yeah, I mean, the mortality rates on a lot of those sailings were atrocious. Sometimes more than 50% of people did not survive the voyage. We're dealing with grim stuff here. So you can see why these diaspora communities would have been particularly keen to hold on to fragments of the old homeland. And I think it's really cool, actually. You get a lot of modern, fiddle festivals and stuff in Scotland, sort of arts festivals. And oftentimes a lot of the artists are actually from Nova Scotia because, they've held on to these traditions in a way that were kind of lost here, actually. So there's a nice circuity to it.
Yes, that's a good way to look at it. And as well, speaking of cool things, Outlander, we'll come back to it again because they did film here. Season 3 was filmed at Dunure Castle and Dunure Harbour, just a little bit further up the coast. And obviously they grasped that kind of idea that we've been talking about, that romanticised, quintessentially Scottish ruin. And although they used quite a lot of CGI because they made it, I think it was Selkie's Island in season 3. It was where young Ian swam out to the island. Jamie and Claire were stuck in the mainland, and they watched as young Ian was abducted by pirates and taken off. It's not an island, so they've CGI'd that, but the ruin itself was the same as appeared in the show, and I think it's one of the best filming locations, actually, I would say.
Absolutely. And I love, again, that it's one of these places that not too much attention to was paid to before. Like, if you were in the area, you knew about it, right? But Like, unfortunately, so many amazing places in Ayrshire,
Yeah.
it's just not rated to the extent that it really should be. And I really hope that this will again be an example of the Outlander effect, bringing a fantastic site to the level of prominence that it deserves. I mean, you know well, it's in your own backyard. I mean, Ayrshire has so many great things to check out, but again, it's that inclination to go north.
Yes, always the way. It's just that Great Western Road from Glasgow and head up to Loch Lomond and then keep going. The south, Ayrshire's a population centre, so it's a very populated area, Ayrshire. And it's not all lovely. There are some places that you'd be better to avoid, but there are so many great sites, and Dunure is one of them. But there's also Greenan Castle further down. Culzean we've touched on already.
I mean, if you want the definition of a precipitous clifftop castle, I mean, Greenan looks like it is teetering on a knife edge. Incredibly dramatic. Isle of Arran.
Yes,
with an easy view right across the water.
Again, similar to the island connection, Arran is just over there. So day trips to down the water, as we used to say on the west coast. Ayrshire would very much have been on that radar, and Largs as well. Go for an ice cream at Largs, the site of that great Viking battle. Hop over to the islands from there.
Absolutely.
That's Ayrshire in a nutshell. So we shall explore Ayrshire more in the future, I think. But that's a great introduction to the region, and we hope you've enjoyed that look at Dunure Castle.
Yeah, so thanks very much for tuning in. Do make sure, of course, to like and subscribe, all that good stuff, because we'll be covering lots more of Scotland's historic sites in the next couple of videos and audio clips we'll be putting together. These 3 have just been the start of our grand adventure, so we do hope you'll join us for more.
Bye for now.